Welcome to the Inside Scoop, episode 51. This is a podcast about self-improvement, and let's just get into it. So, I'm here with Oscar again. We're doing episode 51 of January 8th, New Year, and heard you had a topic to chat about.
You heard right. Yeah, since we never have a topic to talk about, we just make something up on the spot. I was thinking just before the podcast about all the fucking misery in my life over the past few months, and the source of it, and it just kind of came to me, and in a moment that I made a decision sometime. Maybe 2019 or the start of 2020, or some point in the first part of 2020, to become the vice president for computing, the student vice president for computing. And I made that decision very impulsively, in a sort of manic state, as some might call it. And I'm just kind of realizing now that that's one of the only impulsive decisions that I just kind of followed through with, because I kind of made the commitment to other people to do it. You know, when I have impulsive decisions to start a project for myself, a personal project, and maybe I make a small start on it, and then I kind of forget about it, and I don't have to follow through with it. When you make a commitment to other people, you have to kind of follow through with it, because there's this social kind of contract of following through with it. And I just feel like all of the misery that's coming to me now is because I wasn't being true to myself and my personality when I made the decision to do this. On the other hand, I mean, it's been very revealing of a lot of things. It gave me a lot of new things to think about, as I think, what's it called? Adversity always brings a lot of new ideas to the forefront of your mind, because when you have problems to solve, you think of ideas of how to solve them. You think of solutions, and with that comes new ways of looking at the world. So while it brought me a lot of new ideas and new perspectives, by design, by necessity, it was also and kind of still is a very tough time for me. And I said this was taking it to a new level of abstraction, because I don't feel this in any kind of moment. I don't feel this instinctively. It's kind of built upon some ideas that I have that are very abstract already, and it's another level above that perhaps, because I made this decision a long time ago, but I made it impulsively, and I had to follow through with it as a social contract, that now I'm kind of stuck in this place where there was a short period of time where I felt like it was a good idea, and now I'm in a long period of time of executing it when I no longer feel in my element. Yeah.
So you feel like the impulsive decision, that was the whole start, like the beginning of it all?
Well, that's my guess right now. Based on some ideas that partially I've also developed over over this tough period of time. And I feel quite confident about it, yeah. About this guess. I wouldn't say it's just a shot in the dark. I would say it's an educated guess. Yeah.
I mean, it does sound like rooted in reality, at least somewhat, impulsive decisions. I mean, yeah, I can't really generalize too much. Like, some impulsive decisions lead to the best things and the best, experiences that you ever have.
But that's what I'm saying, though. It's like there's a lot of it brought fruition to a lot of ideas as well.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm saying I've put myself through a lot of shit because of it, on the other hand, it's also brought me a lot of ideas. So yeah, you can make a generalization there though, that it's going to be disruptive. Impulsiveness. If you make an impulsive decision and you follow through with it for whatever reason you have to, like you're tied to it for, maybe because your life depends on it now, or because it's a social contract, whatever it might be. It's going to be disruptive in one way or another, and it might be disruptive in a positive way or purely in a negative way. For me, I feel it's, because the idea was partially, putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. And obviously that's being outside of your comfort zone is going to be uncomfortable. And it can go as far as being like, mentally draining, like putting you in depression or whatever, if you take it to some extent too far. On the other hand, by putting yourself in such a situation, you can, grow as a person, because you're widening your perception view of the world in any new uncomfortable situation that you put yourself in. Because it is kind of at the core of my philosophies that, like, new ideas come out of the friction that you have with the world. Like, if you're well adjusted to, like, if you're very comfortable, you don't have to do a lot of thinking, because you don't have to, you don't feel like you have to get out of the situation that you're in because it suits you. But if you're experiencing something that's not comfortable, you want to figure out ways to change your situation, and new ideas arise. That's a very, like, a poor explanation of the whole of my philosophies, because they're not really, like, written down as they're purely abstract conceptual things, and they might remain as that, because there isn't, like, a perfect model for describing the world and describing our thoughts, and describing anything, like everything. All of our models for describing the world and our thoughts and all of that, which are part of the world, are like the best approximation that allows us to make accurate predictions about the world.
Do you ever want to write, try and conceptualize these, like actually write down your ideas?
Yeah,
Do you think you may forget that? We were talking about how David Lynch just said that he has actually forgotten a few ideas. I think it's like 3 biggest ones that he remembers. Well, remembers forgetting, actually, because you don't usually remember the idea what you had. So yeah, I mean, at the same time, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think we are currently, young and are having a sharp mind and all that. So we do rely a lot on, like, just being able to, think of something and then just keep it in our minds. It's a weird direction to take the conversation. I don't know. It doesn't matter, but yeah, I don't know. So when you mentioned that all of this started, as in this, I thought you meant like the whole world situation. But you're more about, like, the internal struggles, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't. I very observe in a limited way what's going on in the world generally, because it's a lot more to understand than just understanding what's going on in your own situation. Like, there's too many disparate things to pay attention to that you can't really. It's hard to form some sort of a knowledge understanding of it all, some sort of a useful model of it all that lasts for a long time. Like the way we as humans, like as individual agents, intelligent agents, model a world, you can build a model of that will last for a long time. Like be able to predict accurately our actions and so on for a long time, what psychology tries to do. And in some parts of it, the world like follows some rules that are like way too complex for us to, and like we attempt to understand small parts of it, but we're also like a small part of it, and so which is a more manageable part to understand because we're with us 24 with ourselves 24/7, with our thoughts 24/7. We can observe our own thoughts.
True, yet it's a very big like science field and psychology and research into our own minds is so sometimes even more difficult than understanding what the other guy may think about something, you know. It's like I think it's almost the same as someone said in the past. We can predict planet movements, you know, billions of years in the future, but we can't predict what weather we're gonna have on our own planet tomorrow, you know. So yeah, it's like it's probably similar, quite similar. I would think, because I still have no idea who I am and on like or how I operate. Even though I've been living with, just as you mentioned in the previously, that you are with yourself 24/7. Sounds weird, but I probably know about a camera better, how a camera operates, than you know how my mind operates, for example. So it's like an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's a good point about when you're able to predict the movement of planets and stuff very well. That's the thing that
it's
we're
probably
able to
macro
currently,
and micro, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing we're able to study like very empirically and stuff. Like it's purely like physical. But then on the other hand, like the interaction of that I guess ties into psychology, but the interaction of all of the different things, exactly things like very generally that are happening on our planet, even like the weather, how it's connected to civilization, what civilization does, animal kingdoms, and how their habitats are being destroyed and things like how all of it interacts with each other. And we have some good models for like understanding that, but yeah, I guess to speak about something that I'm more comfortable speaking about is like, or questioning, is like how humans interact with each other within organizations, and yeah, like that modeling that is very complicated.
Well, are you aware of what happened in the Capitol, like the in the US, what happened? The recent events of like the storming of the Capitol or whatever. I was like, yeah, I don't know much. I still don't know much about it. I haven't looked into it too much, but I randomly came across this 7-second video from probably years ago, but just again, YouTube somehow decided that it wants to recommend David Lynch to me for the past like week. So I'm like, okay. And then that guy just, there's like a random scuffed video of like 7 seconds. And he's like, can you imagine what Einstein had to deal with? What he had to carry it all? Like everyone's a goddamn moron. Like there's so many morons around. How did that guy handle them all? You know, it's like, But anyway, so I think it just ties into the damn Trump situation with whatever the hell's happening out there. I have
Mm.
no idea, dude. It's scary.
I think that the interesting thing about Einstein is he, I believe, I know I've got a scrap of information left, or from something I read a long time ago, that like the discoveries that he made about, well, let's say the universe, were like basically in his own language, like not in his own language
Mhm.
that we speak, but like in his own conceptual way, like explain in his own conceptual way. And it took some scientist, I think at Harvard, some researcher, professor, to actually read that and see the genius in it and actually translate it to
Mm.
something that more scientists can understand. So
I
that
have
was really
heard that
cool.
he was kind of a slow person, you know, in like a temperament way. He had the phlegmatic temperament or whatever that thing is called. Like he would struggle to talk to people, but he would, the way he himself described is like he has more time to think. Probably like Stephen Hawking, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
Same.
it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense in that, when his work had to be translated for people to understand it, like translated as in, into the
Mhm.
science, the established science, when it had to be translated into that by another person, and I need to read up on this to be not completely off about it. But it makes sense that, he was in his own conceptual world that allowed
Mm.
him to be, sort of creative and think of these new ideas. And then that had to be reattached back into the established science.
Yeah, I mean, if you have your ways of doing things, which are, you know, faster ways of whatever it is, you know, interfacing with your brain, even in this case, probably he just went away with it. Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
did not know that before. That's interesting.
I think I sent you before the podcast started. Was a thing saying certainty is the killer of
Creativity?
creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I made this Google search for that, or DuckDuckGo search for that, and I found the quote because I've learned some new Google skills.
Ooh.
If you put quotes around, it was quotes around something, it searches for that exact phrase. If you put a
Mm-hmm.
plus sign before a word, it says it must include this word as well in the search.
A minus
It's like exclude.
makes, yeah, exclude. Yeah, that's good stuff.
Hmm. Why should you
Like,
exclude a word from a search instead of not including it?
hmm.
Uh,
Like
anyway.
dude, I have used the minus the most, like the most used symbol in search for me with
Oh, I
quotes or
think it's if
anything.
it's you want to search for it, but you don't want to. No, I don't understand. I'm confused right now. Anyway, what
No,
I
it's
was
very
saying.
simple. So, for example, if you want to search for Home Alone and you type in Home Alone, and then all of these recent Home Alone 6,
Oh,
Home
right.
Alone
Okay, I
5
get it now.
come
Yeah, yeah.
up. Yeah.
All right, I know
Or
what
you
you
want
mean
to
now.
search for something that is, I don't know, can be related to two fields or two things, you know. You can do like Einstein and then minus physics, then maybe you're going to see all of his achievements in chemistry or whatever, you know. It's like,
Yeah, I get it now. I was a bit confused there. Yeah. So I was searching. Certainty is the killer of creativity, and what I got was some guy, some graphic designer, some well, well, well known graphics designer, uh, saying something very similar. Creativity is the killer of imagination.
hmm.
And I'm just thinking the imagination that Einstein had to come up with all this stuff. Would it have been killed if he had been more in touch with uh, the established science, physics? Because my idea is that when you have questions and you have Google in front of you and you can just research answers straight away, you're kind of like satisfied, like
Hmm.
you're your curiosity is satisfied and you stop. You're like, oh, I guess that's why, and that's it. That's the end of the thinking. It's like, I've got the answer now. Otherwise, you go out on your own and try to figure it out in other ways. But that's a gray area, like for when you should and shouldn't do that. But certainly, I think if anytime you have a question, you just Google it or ask somebody, or look up in a reference book about a science field, then you're just kind of like accepting the status quo, but so you're not able to advance, or you're not capable of answering that question anyway originally, or having original thought about that question. But the other thing is, with Max Planck thing about science moves on with one funeral at a time or whatever, where he's like, the meaning behind it, what he was saying basically is that the new generation of scientists have new ways of looking at things basically, and the old way of looking at things dies is the actual old generation dying off, literally, and the new thing becomes more prevalent. So it might be that you might have one exceptional person who comes up with some interesting new way of looking at things somehow, or the field just naturally moves on to a new way of looking at things gradually, and that's how discoveries are made. But yeah, I mean, it's a complex, and that's the complex problem that I'm talking about modeling. It's like you can't model. It's really hard to model all the variables that are going on there, and eventually, if you want to model it, you have to settle on some model of modeling it. Some model anyway. You have to settle on some model of looking at it, where there could be infinitely many other models of looking at it, and you're stuck with that. But the whole idea of a model, what it defines a good model, is its ability to predict good. What I would say is a good model is its ability to predict the real physical world. Yeah,
there has to be a good enough model eventually. Like you can try and strive for looking for the best thing and never find it, but then maybe find something and eventually make more progress with it than you would chasing something
So what
else.
we have is good enough for a lot of things, for whatever, it might be good for a lot of things, but you could do even better. So
it's actually interesting because I literally today I thought this thought like a few hours ago. Don't know how this quantum entanglement mess works, but I have thought of being influenced by random decisions, and not decisions, but like having my model, I think I guess let's just describe it in that way, model towards many things, be influenced by whatever I'm learning or whatever now, and then I just told myself, it's like trying to neurolinguistically program yourself to catch yourself in the future if you become grumpy about someone offering you a better way of doing something, or whatever. It's like it's the paradox of like old people when they have their established methods, and even though those methods are like absolutely inefficient by today's standards, you still cling on to them because they just get the job done, and about it, and you kind of, it's not like you don't want to learn new ones, and then again, I was thinking of how this might influence creativity and other decisions that I will do in the future. I wonder what sparked this, because I had like a concept of trying to explain this in a concrete manner, like I had an example of something. Maybe it's even the YouTube videos, right? Even if, okay, so that's one of it. Let's say YouTube videos, right? I kind of saw someone else's video or whatever, and I was like, this doesn't really follow any conventions or whatever, right? And then I thought, okay, but what are the conventions, Maybe the way I think of creating a YouTube video is like, that's what I've been exposed to and I've been influenced by, and now, all I can do is this, because somehow I would otherwise need to break out of this, think outside the box, as they say. But that's the thing, it's difficult if your model's already like this and that. Once you get the idea of streamlining the process of, let's say, making the podcast, it's absolutely fine. We can just churn it out real quick, like do processing on all of that, and we know what we do. Systems are good for that. But when it comes to creative ways of making something, you just sometimes you get taken back by something. You like get surprised by how genius the idea seems, even though it's so simple. And you're like, oh, maybe just because we were following this one track so much, we didn't even think of trying it the other way. So when you were explaining the AI kind of thing, I do understand what you mean in a way, of learning AI. So I kind of could relate this to that. Like,
okay, yeah, and I guess all of the kind of ideas that we have like this are all kind of peppered across like literature. Like all of the thoughts that we have are kind of somewhere written down somewhere and just like kind of waiting to be interpreted the right way.
Yeah, I guess if we just read all the books that exist, we would have things to look, like a dictionary of ideas, kind of to look up. It's like, oh, this was written in the fifth chapter of Einstein's book or whatever. Like,
yeah. So that's what would happen if we had created some artificial intelligence like us, but incapable of doing like 1,000 years of human thinking in 1 second, right? It's like it could actually conceptualize all of these things at once.
Yeah, but it's difficult to think of what that AI should look like, because we would need to absolutely completely change the way of how we think about AI. Then I guess we would need to, instead of thinking of how to make an AI, we would need to think of how do we use the processing power that we have in order to solve problems, something like that. Because I still have a lot of misconceptions about AI probably, and it's like and that's why I don't want to get involved with it, because I just see tutorials and every single one is like computer vision, image recognition, and I'm like, dude, that's stupid. I know that you can solve so many problems with this, but there's literally just like 0.01% of probably even more zeros, of what its potential is. Although maybe at the same time you can't really learn that much, because there aren't really many people teaching it, because if they are pioneers of a certain way of using AI, they're probably making money off of it by applying it instead of teaching other people of how to use it. So it's like a thing that you have to carve your own path in, I guess, but don't know.
Yeah, and when you were saying about the old people sticking to their guns and doing their own thing, like doing things their way that they've done for a very long time and not liking the new ways of doing things, what I would say is that's probably, well, somewhat is because it's their identity, basically. Like, if you imagine you've done a thing for a certain way for a long time, you really don't want to admit to yourself that there is a better way of doing it now. And there's also the idea, when I was saying that, all of these things are kind of like purported in literature, and the things we say and our phrases, the phrase of, hiring fresh blood into a company or something like that. It's always to bring new ideas to the table. And, that would explain, that would kind of show that, the old generation eventually is no use anymore, because we need to, for a company that needs to innovate, right? And so that would kind of show also that there is like a real relationship between, you know, being older and having those kind of concrete or there's some solid ideas that you don't want to be broken because you've built some sort of a foundation for some sort of, you know, your model of the world is basically like based on them, and like taking like a brick out of this model would make it just all not, you know, fall down or whatever. You're like, this doesn't make sense. Like, what else is like not the best way of doing things anymore? Is all of it like phony?
Yeah.
Is all of it? Yeah. Then you don't want to do that. Like, it's a basic
in
human
a way,
thing.
Yeah, I guess in a way that makes sense. And in another way, old people just probably can't give any more shits about things. They just like, I've been dealing with nonsense for so long. Fuck it, you know?
Yeah.
No wonder they would just don't deal with certain things. It's like needing to stay in a cheap ass motel. They're like, oh, fuck that, dude. Like, just a very simple example, but yeah. And I think that one of that it even came from Jonathan Blow himself. He programmed for so many years already, and he's used Visual Studio, I think, and he actually did explore these ideas about settling with something. And he's like, yeah, when you do it for so long, you just can't be arsed to deal with things anymore. And he's like, when you're young, you're still okay. You know, you're like young, you can adapt, you can still like deal with things, right? But eventually it just becomes too much, and you're like, why the hell am I spending so much of my time trying to get this thing to work instead of just having it work, you know? So it's one of those ideas about software, I guess, but yeah. You could probably just apply it to so much more.
Yeah. So I guess that's the other thing, not learning another tool that is just marginally better to at doing the job that what you've been using for a long time. And then a part of it is like maybe trying to justify to yourself that your tool is better, so you don't feel bad about sticking with it. At an old age like that, you probably don't feel about it that way. You just don't give a shit anymore. But you're like, hey, whatever the fucking tool gets the job done, right?
Yeah.
Whatever puts the money in my pocket, basically.
We can only guess, but yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Well, that's our half an hour. Have anything to add? Nope. Well, in that case, it's been a nice chat. And thank you everybody for listening. Expect us next week, as always. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, blah, blah, everywhere. This podcast is available in video form on YouTube. Just Google The Inside Scoop, and you're most likely going to come across it. So that's us. See you next week.
See ya.